the way that I put it to people is that, when you send a Bitcoin transaction, how horrible of an experience is it to send a Bitcoin transaction? Like, I'm sorry, it just is, right? First, when I send a Lightning transaction, I'm like, holy shit, awesome, right? Now it's like that jump from sending a Bitcoin transaction to sending a Lightning transaction. To me, it's like the same jump from sending a Lightning transaction to sending transactions that have kind of these smart wallets, account abstraction features, where so much of the complexity is not only is it fast and cheap and does all the stuff and maybe pays my gas and whatever, but also just like I don't have to think about the whole journey of what the hell this transaction is actually doing. Like it just does it for me, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
All right, Viktor, thanks for coming and taking the time to chat.
Of course, it's my pleasure.
So the first time I met you, I was like super impressed because I was like, oh, wow, this guy has like tons of hot takes and he's like not afraid to share them. And I feel like they were really spot on. So I definitely in this episode want to go over a bunch of the hot takes you have across a number of things. But I think the sense that I've gotten over the past month or two from you is like the one thing that you love more than this industry is like you are very family pilled right now. Like you are like all about like, start your family, get married, find the love of your life. Like it's the best thing ever. So maybe you can share with us, if you're open to, like what's been going on in your personal life. How has that been?
Yeah, it's been lovely. We had our second one about 4 months ago, and it's one of those things where when I was growing up, I was never about other people's kids. Like I could not care less about other people's kids whatsoever. When you have your own, it's a completely different story. And I think that one of the things that I tried to do is I was always very good about learning from my mistakes. And at one point, one of the guys that I really trusted from high school and college was amazing. He was like, you would do really well to learn from other people's mistakes too. And I was like, holy shit, that's brilliant. And so one thing I try to do is learn from other people's mistakes. And if there's any mistake that people, repeatedly regret making as they get older, it's almost always about family. No one talks about it. It's like, oh, I wish I did this in college, or I wish I did this at work, or whatever. Everyone says, I wish that I, found the love of my life. I wish I let myself be happy. I wish that I did this and this. And so for me, I think that today's generation is getting like a little psyops into thinking that kids are a lot of work and it's not worth it. And, freedom is very valuable. And kids are work and freedom is valuable. Like all these things are partially true. But the deeper truth is that this is something that we've been doing for a very long time as humanity. And it is awesome. It's really, really good. And it's worth it for all the sacrifices you have to make for it, which are actually a much shorter list than most people realize. And so I'm very pro-natalist.
That's awesome. I love that. Like on my side, I have one older brother and they're having their first due in May. And that's the first kind of like child coming in. That's kind of in like the immediate family. So it's been very good, like just positive family vibes and, like growing this whole community, this little like world that we built. I think it's really amazing. And I do agree. I mean, I think that, the people that I love and respect the most just only speak so highly about like creating a family and that being their highest purpose. So I thought that was cool for us to start out with and you kind of share.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity.
Cool. So, all right. So let's get into some of the business side stuff. Like maybe give an introduction to yourself and your background, what you did previously and what you're doing now.
Sure. So I'm a protocol specialist at Coinbase and also the co-founder of Credibly Neutral, which is a relatively small venture fund. And we invest in protocols, infrastructure, and SaaS. And so on the protocol specialist side, essentially you can think of me as somebody that runs a team at Coinbase of folks that are very, very crypto native, whose job it is to understand all the various different protocols, upgrades, developments, technologies, trends, everything that's happening in the industry, and then operationalize those insights to drive product strategy, roadmap, features, content, legal, pricing. And so we'll work on stuff such as getting Lightning Network supported at Coinbase. We'll work on staking assets. We'll work on CBBTC, go to market. We'll work on bridging and MEV and, policy stuff and, ETH ETF stuff and all kinds of stuff. On the fund side, it's been a labor of love where we did about 30 angel checks. My wife and I, she's the other co-founder of the fund. And so we did about 30 angel checks and we had a lovely time working with founders and we wanted to take it up a level. And so we decided to start this relatively small fund to start with the intention of putting a little bit more of a brand around what we're doing and putting our stake in the ground where we try to differentiate ourselves by being the highest value per dollar invested of any investor on a cap table. And so we do our best to help portfolio companies and really trying to create a brand around that.
Okay, so many things you mentioned there that I want to talk about. And so your wife, Lisa, like she's actually, is she the CEO of Aztec as well?
She's COO at Aztec, and then she's also the co-founder of the fund with me.
Got it. And Aztec is doing like the privacy preserving L2 rollups on Ethereum?
Yeah, exactly. And I think privacy is, without privacy in crypto, we're just building the most perfect surveillance machine that has ever existed. And so, very, very bullish on what they're building. I think it's going to be incredibly important for all of our futures.
Yeah, me too as well. And I know that our founding cryptographer, Liam, is actually one of the advisors for Aztec as well. So I think there's some synergies there. I'm curious, like, I was going to bring this up later, but on the privacy side, like, do you have any hot takes on that? Because it is like, it's a hot button topic, right? I mean, like, I feel like privacy is very ideologically aligned. It's a little bit of a scary space as well, like a lot of the Tornado Cash stuff. Like, do you have positions on that?
Yeah. I have a few takes, but one really interesting development that I thought was kind of indicative, where if you look at the parallel, so there's a really good book called Crypto, and it's about the 1990s cryptography wars in terms of how do we get it off the munitions list and how do we legalize strong encryption for export and things of that nature. And you saw the government being very aggressive about trying to diminish privacy and hamstring it and make it unavailable to people and businesses, not only in America, but also across the world. And that was, now, Jesus Christ, 25 years ago. Holy moly. I keep thinking of the 90s, 2000 being like a decade ago. That is not true. And if you actually look at recent developments, now the government is telling people, hey, I want you to use end-to-end encrypted communication systems because China and these other countries are attacking all these essentially honeypots of information and trying to gather personal data, conversations, financial data, et cetera, about American citizens and, of course, citizens of other countries too. And so, it took 25 years for that turnaround, which is obviously like not ideal, but now the government is advocating for encryption and privacy. And so what does that mean on the financial sense? On the financial sense, we're very much, in the 1990s in terms of what the government wants, right? What the government wants is to have complete and total visibility into everything that everybody's doing. And they're creating these like enormous honeypots of information. And the information that's coming out recently is that you have folks like FDIC and all these other entities that are being hacked and are having enormous amounts of American information being essentially made available to other governments. And so I think we're going to go through something very similar where it's going to look, 20 years from now, potentially, hopefully shorter, it's going to be crazy that there were honeypots of financial information. And so like privacy will become the norm, encryption will become the norm, not only for communications, but also for financial transactions. And so that's obviously very, very far away. But, I think before I had the assumption that the government is always going to want to see, everybody's financial information. But now that I'm seeing this parallel of communications and them advocating for encryption, now I'm like, okay, so there is a path where they advocate for encryption and privacy in the financial sector as well. And so now the question is what happens between now and 20 years from now, right? When the government finally realizes that this is correct. There, I think that, one, definitely more of a battlefield, right? A global battlefield. But I also think that, Trump's winning of the American presidency is the most important factor because I think that Democrats have made it extremely clear where they stand on crypto, where they stand on privacy, where they stand on technology. And so in terms of being able to pass reasonable legislation that protects Americans and enables them to use innovative technology, we have much higher odds of being able to do that under the Trump administration. And then looking beyond that, right, there's a really good chance that after Trump goes out of office, there's a really good chance Vance comes in. And so that will potentially be another 4 to 8 years. And so now you're looking at kind of this Goldilocks period where, if we think that the government will advocate for encryption and privacy for financial transactions in 20 years, now you're like, hey, well, what if the next 12 years are potentially under, these presidencies that are very favorable to it? Does that 20-year become shorter, right? And in these 12 years, like, does it become easier to actually enable Americans to use this privacy-preserving technology?
Okay, that I feel like that was optimistic. Sometimes there's like some doomerism around like privacy, but I think that parallel to privacy with digital information to now what's happening, hopefully with privacy with financial information, that makes sense to me. And I think what you're saying is potentially right about, Trump coming in with 4 and then JD maybe being 4 to 8, and this kind of like general trend away from this hostility to a lot of the crypto industry. So, okay, I like it. All right, so let's move on next. Like, I want to get your hot takes on Bitcoin builder culture, and I think you in particular might have interesting perspective because you helped bring Lightning Network into Coinbase. So maybe give us your hot takes on the culture as a whole, and then that process on bringing Lightning into Coinbase.
Yeah. So the first thing I'll say is I think a lot of people don't know, but I was originally like only involved in Bitcoin back in the day when I was just coming into it in 2017. Thank you. And so I have like a deep love and appreciation for Bitcoin. I helped the Lightning Labs team host the first Lightning Summit back in 2019. And so I was one of the leader organizers there. And then, I spent most of my time focusing on Ethereum, Solana, and all these other ecosystems in addition to Bitcoin and Lightning since then. And when I looked at Lightning deeply again last year, there were a couple of things that stood out to me about Lightning in particular, but also just about the builder culture in Bitcoin. I think that there's a little bit of a stratification that's happening where there are some people that are like extremely giving and wonderful and just like want to help and want to do the best thing for everyone and always try to make Bitcoin and Lightning and just the ecosystem succeed. And those people are incredible. There's a ton of them that are wonderful to work with. And there's some folks that are, have this a little bit more of like a negative bent to them, where things have to be done in a particular way, and everything that goes outside of those social norms or outside those technological norms, it's not just that they disagree with it, but they can, agree to disagree. So they disagree with it, and they think that it's evil, and they think that it's monstrous, and they think that you're a bad person, and and that you're doing a horrible thing. And so there's an enemy, an adversarial component to it. And so when I look at kind of like the Bitcoin and Lightning and builder culture, something that was kind of clear to me is that if, before there was Lightning, before there was, a little bit more programmability with, runes and BRC20s, like all this other stuff, right? I think people were very, very negative, where they didn't want innovation on Bitcoin. They didn't want for things to have any kind of trust assumptions whatsoever. And what people found is that it's very hard to build things that have absolutely zero trust assumptions. Like it's extremely, extremely challenging. And so now I think what's happening is that the cohort of folks that are very adversarial towards builders that make any kind of trust assumptions or they try to do anything that is a little bit different or a little bit creative, that cohort of folks is very loud, but they are I think, diminishing cohort. And I think that what's coming down the pipe is you have, builders and users and investors that, are willing to say, hey, it doesn't have to be 100% perfect 100% of the time, immediately from scratch, and have immaculate conception and all this other stuff. And if we want to onboard the world onto Bitcoin and we want them to use it, we want them to be able to use it trustlessly and do things with it, and we want it to be useful, then you need for some amount of flexibility in terms of how you build these systems and how you launch them from scratch and how you kind of, make them better over time. And so I think the builder culture in Bitcoin is definitely improving quite a bit. And I think it's becoming, while still being very strong and very committed to decentralization, all this other stuff, of course, right? But still leaving room for people to, not launch a perfect thing on day one and be able to say like, hey, we're going to improve this over time.
Yeah. I think what you're kind of implying here, and maybe if I'm reading between the lines, is that there is that kind of like, maximalist, like purist culture within Bitcoin. And I'll say it, I think a good amount of those people maybe don't have full understanding of like the technical nuances necessary to like integrate and build some of these technologies. And maybe that caused like a little bit of resistance with your experience of trying to like integrate some of these technologies. But now we really are seeing this like Overton window shifting where maybe, some people are coming back to Bitcoin and like there's different ways to scale with like, varying but still like very strong trust assumptions. And maybe there is change in the air. So I guess that all makes sense on Bitcoin culture. What about your experience, like specifically working to bring Lightning Network into Coinbase? Like I'm curious about that. Was that a big technical lift? Like what hurdles did you guys run into? what was the traction once it was done?
Yeah. I'll go back one step and just say one last thing about the builder culture. And it's that, right now we look at Elon Musk and we look at Palmer Luckey and we look at, Ben Horowitz and Mark Andreessen. We look at a lot of folks that have shifted the Overton window and kept it open for others to walk through. And I think that concept is extremely important. So when I look at the builder environment on Bitcoin, I think to myself, look, you should make an enemy of the maxis. Just straight up, right? You should be specific about who are the builders and users you want to attract to your ecosystem, to want to attract to what you're working on. You should say, if you fit that characteristic, you're going to have a wonderful time here. If you don't fit that characteristic, don't come. We don't want you here. Like you're welcome to come and hang out or whatever it is, but like you're not the kind of person that we're looking for. And I think being specific about that is what shifts the Overton window and what creates space for these builders to be able to come in and do the things that they want to be doing, right? And we saw that with Andrew saying like, hey, we are building weapons, right? Like that is what we're not building defense, although the defense is one of the things it's used for. We're specifically building weapons. And you look at OpenAI, they're like, we are building AGI. Like we're not here to build a new ML model. We're building AGI. So if you come here, you have to want to build AGI. You can't be like, I'm not going to build AGI, right? So anyway, but on the Lightning stuff, so it was really interesting because it was something that Coinbase has been looking at for a long time. And, Brian Armstrong in particular was excited about Lightning for years. And one of the things that we saw as we kept looking at it is that the technology was coming along, but the traction and adoption was fairly limited. And, there were a number of reasons for that. And so every year as we took a look, it was kind of like not quite there yet, where like not a lot of people were asking for it. There wasn't a lot of usage. And so when I looked at it in 2023, it was because Brian had said, hey, I want to take another look at this. And so I ended up getting the assignment, you can think of it as. And so I put together a team and we started looking at it. And even then we saw that the amount of volume that actually goes through on Lightning, and yes, it's not like perfectly tracked and some channels are private, and et cetera, right? Is really tiny, like just super tiny compared to stablecoins on Ethereum, for example. And, one realization we had was a couple of things, which is one, it is growing and it grows regardless of whether it's a bull market or a bear market. Like this is a thing that has legs and is going to keep growing. And in 23, we recognized that, we are going to be going into a bull market. And so if we don't do it right now, are we really going to prioritize it during a bull market when, there's so many other things that we can be doing and our resources are going to be stretched so thin? Another thing that we thought about is that the technology has come so far along, and working with providers, whether it's node clients, whether it's, working with somebody like Lightspark that, we are able to outsource some of the work for, has made integrating Lightning significantly easier than it was before. Like we don't have to do our own channel management, for example, and like, routing paths and all that stuff. And the last thing is that, at Coinbase, we think Bitcoin is the most important asset, right? Like, and Brian in particular is a huge Bitcoin believer and supporter and has onboarded more people to Bitcoin than I think almost anybody. And, we want to do what it takes to make Bitcoin successful. And so even though Lightning, if we looked at it from a pure metrics perspective and we're like, okay, is this, the new hotness that is going to, overtake transaction volumes and all these other places? And we're like, well, it's not quite there yet. But if Coinbase adds support now, it can be one of the stepping stones to helping it get there. And so, we were super happy to take that step and do that work. And frankly, integrating Lightning wasn't as hard as I thought it was going to be. Like it was still hard, to be clear, and it took some time. But given what my estimates were from prior years, this was definitely an easier lift than it would have been before.
Amazing. Okay, so you mentioned a couple things there. One, like a little bit of the Bitcoin culture, which and then some of the Lightning stuff. I want to go back to the Bitcoin culture thing because you kind of had a spicy take there, I think, where you said, hey, like we almost want to present this forward that, hey, you're almost not welcome here. This like Bitcoin maximalist, this almost like dogmatic. Am I interpreting your position correctly there? That like we almost want to shift the Overton window and say like this is what we want to build for Bitcoin and promote that vision. Or did I misinterpret you there?
No, that's exactly it, right? But again, it doesn't mean that there's no place for maximalists within the Bitcoin ecosystem and community. There is, right? But if what you're trying to do is build a place where builders can come and create things, then like that is not a place where maximalists are going to thrive and builders are going to thrive.
Totally. I think, what's different now though, it is that now I've said this a couple times that the builders are in control. In prior years, I think people would have tried to take the position that you're taking, but we literally just like could not build on Bitcoin. And so you almost had to pander to the maximalists because the default position is like nothing can change in Bitcoin. You need a soft fork. If you don't like it, just go and fork off. That would always be the ace in the hole for the maximalists whenever they get in some sort of argument. But now it's like with this advent of we got Taproot in, and then Casey discovered you can embed arbitrary data, and now you have these like inscription envelopes, and then that opened up BitVM. Like the builders are now in control, and they're the ones that actually have the leverage. Like what we're doing at Alpin, we can actually hack in this ZK verification. We can build these rollups. Like you have these meta protocols, and so now I think it's easier for people to take the position that you're kind of suggesting, where it's like, hey, if you're anti-building and you're like pro-ossification, you fork. Like you're the one that goes and forks off and reverse out the Taproot change and like prevents us from putting this arbitrary data on. But the default position now favors the builders. And so I do think you are going to start to see a lot of this renaissance around Bitcoin culture. And that's probably underpinning a lot of the Overton window shifting, is because a new party just has leverage now.
Yeah. And I think, I mean, I very strongly agree with that point, but I think that although builders now have more leverage, I don't think that builders are in control. I think that the way that builders become in control is by creating applications and experiences that users love using in large amounts. And when a user, and like it's really, the builders are in control because of the users, if that kind of makes sense, right? And so what that means is that users have to be using the builder applications, and that's how builders get, more and more kind of like political sway in like the broader culture that is Bitcoin. And so I think that right now that the number of applications within Bitcoin is really, really small. The number of users that are interacting with it is really small compared to what it can be. And so I think that we're in the early innings of the builders taking control. I think right now the leverage is on their side, but in order to really capitalize on it, you need to do stuff like what Alpin is doing, obviously, of creating a place for app developers, so those app developers to then create applications for users to use them. And then what's going to happen is that somebody's going to listen to a podcast or listen to a tweet where some maxi is being really obnoxious about things. And they'd be like, well, I like using this stuff and I want to use it and I get yield on it, or I get NFTs, or I get social or whatever it is. I'm not going to listen to this big dummy because I want to go and use this stuff. And so I think that's how the overall kind of a culture shifts much more and influence shifts much more. I think we're still early in that.
Okay. Let's segue into the next topic then. So you mentioned Alpin. Again, like part of the reason why I want an interview is you guys are credibly neutral. Like you came in as part of our strategic round. So maybe just touch on like why Alpin. You already touched a little bit on like why Bitcoin, but give me some of the investment thesis there.
Yeah. So the investment thesis is that one of the most important things that I think that we can do in our lifetime is make Bitcoin programmable. Because if Bitcoin is not programmable, then you have a couple of outcomes. Outcome number one is that the only way that you can really use it is through centralized intermediaries, right? I think
that's great for you guys.
Great for us, but unacceptable for Bitcoin, right? And so outcome number two is that you bridge Bitcoin over onto Ethereum or Solana, whatever it is, whether it's through CBBTC or TBTC or some other form, and you use it in the applications there. And I think that's also unacceptable for Bitcoin because you need Bitcoin to be able to have transaction fees, right? You need Bitcoin to have a security budget. And so, and you also want things to be trustless, right? Like you don't want to be afraid about, whether it's CBTC security or Coinbase security or some other company security or whatever it is. And so I think for Bitcoin to be the best money that it can be, it needs to be programmable. You need to be able to do stuff with it. You need to be able to take a loan and do like fancy, interesting things. And so when I think about that, then that's basically the investment thesis for Alpin, right? If Alpin can help make Bitcoin programmable, I think it's one of the most exciting and important opportunities in all of crypto. So it was an easy bet from that perspective, given what a strong team it is and what a huge market it is and how important this work is to the world.
Yeah. And so, maybe this is a question you'll toss back on me, but like what are your expectations? Do you think that we just like can build a pretty good programmable Bitcoin environment, or like do you think that we could actually jump straight to the end game of like almost near feature parity with where a lot of these Ethereum rollups in modular ecosystem is? Like when you guys made this bet, is it like, well, hey, this is just better than Bitcoin currently is, and that alone is a good investment thesis, or maybe we can hit this, grand slam and actually, be on par with the frontier?
In terms of being on par with the frontier, I think I think it's very possible. And the reason I think it's possible is because when you have Ethereum blazing the path, all the other ecosystems could just copy what Ethereum is doing because they can learn from it, right? And they see the mistakes and they see what's working. And so you're just like, hey, let's not do any of the stuff that doesn't work. Let's just do the stuff that does work, right? So you have a lot of case studies. And so that's quite lovely. And I do think Alpine is capable of getting there. I think the question becomes, at what point are you able to become a leader? And that's one of the things that I haven't seen from any other ecosystem where, maybe they'll innovate in some like interesting ways, but they're not really pushing the envelope and not really coming up with great research, not really coming out with great directions for what the future of infrastructure and dApp development looks like. And so will you hit feature parity? Probably. Will you be able to advance past what Ethereum is able to do and what the rollup ecosystem there is able to do? I don't know, right? Like that is a tall order and it's going to be years away, right? Just because you're going to be playing catch up for a while as is everybody.
Yeah, no, I think that's good perspective, and for myself, I think that there's pretty clear evidence now that we can get damn near close to feature parity. I mean, there are some just still insurmountable challenges where you'll be limited on like the layer one block space, so data availability. Maybe you won't have that finality because of proof of work versus proof of stake, but in terms of like the expressivity and like the trustlessness and like the scalability of off-chain DA, like I think we are going to jump straight to the end game there, and but without a lot of the technical bloat of Ethereum. And
yeah,
I think one of the things that is going to drive some Ethereum people a bit nuts is that over a long enough time frame, the value accrues to monetary premium. And for all of Bitcoin's faults, it owns the category of like money and monetary premium. And as fees get driven down to zero and MEV compresses, where all that value goes is to Bitcoin. And I think that's going to frustrate a lot of people in these other ecosystems that maybe were right directionally on the technical components of like what is the proper direction to scale, but maybe don't own that end game of monetary premium. Do you have any opinions on that?
Yeah, I think that's I think it's not a good way to look at it for a few reasons. Like I think it's wrong. I think the first thing is that I think it's extremely unlikely that we're just gonna have one blockchain, right? And like one environment, one token, one money for all the things. And so I think different tokens have different monetary premiums. And if Bitcoin is really good in some portion of the monetary premium, Ethereum is really good in other portions of the monetary premium. And so, for example, ETH is being used as money much more often and in much higher volumes than Bitcoin is, like by far, right? And then when you look at payments, when you look at DeFi, when you look at NFT volumes, when you look at DEXs, when you look at everything, ETH is just a much more useful token from that perspective in terms of actual user adoption, right? When you look at Bitcoin is being used much more as a store of wealth, right, and as an investment, and so they are dominating in their respective categories, right? But they're tackling different parts of the monetary premium spectrum, and so I don't think there's a world where it's like going to be like Bitcoin or Ethereum. Like I just don't think that's really going to be happening. But I do think there's going to be a world where you're going to have multiple different ecosystems. Like each token will have, its own kind of like monetary premium based on how it's being used and by what portion of the world and so on and so forth. And then over time, I do think that the monetary premium is extremely important, and I'm very bullish on it. I don't think that the Ethereum people are going to be frustrated by it. I don't think the Bitcoin people are going to be frustrated by it. Like it's just a thing that people will figure out over time.
Well, I'm sympathetic to that point, and I think you're probably more likely to be right than not. But if I just presented a kind of like Steelman against that, I think what will be interesting to see is as these ecosystems develop, you're right that I don't think it will be like one singular chain. I think it's like very shown that like we're going to need to horizontally scale, and you want these multiple environments. Like you don't just want the EVM or the SVM or whatever, but there are these kind of like inherent trust limitations of like what Vitalik calls like multi-chain versus cross-chain, and like, the Celestia guys calls like sovereign zones, and where like if you are building on like the same kind of consensus layer, the same Bitcoin layer, then you could have all these different execution environments that like have the trustless interoperability. So you get this network effect from these multiple chains, versus like if you try to take Bitcoin from that economic zone and bridge it into like the Ethereum economic zone, you inherit some sort of trust assumptions. And so I think in the long run, when we see these ecosystems play out, you're going to have the kind of like Bitcoin economic zone with like all this ZK verification and like trustless interop there. And then you're going to have these other chains like, Ethereum and stuff. And it's like, what is going to be a more powerful network effect for where the value wants to accrue? Is it going to be, it wants to be closer to Bitcoin, therefore superior trust assumptions? And you start seeing the network effect of developers really come closer to that economic zone because that is where so much of the collateral and value exists? Or is it going to be this still overwhelming where everybody's like, look, all the tooling, all the developers, like all the pre-existing infrastructure existing in these other zones, and we're willing to take on some added trust assumptions to bring Bitcoin into this zone? I think that's going to be a very interesting thing to see play out, of which is the more powerful black hole.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has played out already, and we kind of see what the answer is. I think the answer is that people are willing to take on additional trust assumptions. And that's the place where I think that Bitcoiners, especially, folks building, Bitcoin L2 like you guys, it's very important to almost like not try to draw distinctions, not try to make enemies of Ethereum builders and Ethereum like way of looking at the world and et cetera. Because I think that if there's anything that we've seen, it's that users are very happy with trust assumptions. Just straight up, like they don't want to pay more for perfect security. They don't want slower transactions for perfect security. They would like transactions to be cheap and fast. And if you had to ask them, how does Solana make them cheap and fast versus how does Base make them cheap and fast versus how does Lightning make them cheap and fast, they don't know the difference between any of the security assumptions there. They're just like, I have no idea, but it's probably going to work and it's probably going to be fine. And I think it's going to become more and more true over time as these protocols become more and more Lindy, right? Where you just like trust that it'll work fine because it's been around for so long and nothing bad has happened. And so, and so I think that there will be the economic zones, but I think ultimately what you need to do is you need to build applications that people want to use, right? Like users are not going to stick with Bitcoin dApps if, when they trade on the, Bitcoin DEX, they get huge slippage and huge fees and slow transaction times and they get front run and all this stuff. They're going to be like, I love Bitcoin, but I'm just trying to buy whatever. And like, I will go where I can do that best. And so I think that the most important thing will be to build things that users want. And then when you look at the security and you look at all of the decentralization, all the other things that we really value as an ecosystem, all of that has to be the foundation, but it's not enough on its own, right? Like you need to have this other stuff as well.
I think it's a pragmatic view. And I think you're probably correct there. My ideological side comes out though, and hopes that it wasn't as true, but I think you may be right there. So you mentioned a couple times of like, at the end of the day, you just got to build useful stuff. Like you got to build things that people actually want to use. Like the distribution, the usage is the leading of everything else. So this is a question a lot of people struggle with. It's like, what actually should get built? Like assume that we figure out the infrastructure and the ZK verification. What are the apps and the things that people want to see? What do you want to see? Where do you think there's actual product market fit?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those places where you guys are very fortunate because you could literally just look at Ethereum and be like, hey, all the stuff that's over here, we should do over here. And a couple of the ones that come to mind immediately are there should be stablecoins, right? There should be DEXs, there should be lending. Like the fact that people in the community and various communities were pushing their users to use, the BlockFis of the world and the Celsius of the world and like all these different kind of like centralized borrowing and lending organizations in order to generate some yield is like, like really unfortunate, especially when you compare it to something like Aave that's been around for, I think, 5 years as of yesterday or 2 days ago. They have tens of billions of dollars. As the market goes up, goes down, like they're able to manage their liquidations effectively. And, people remain able to access their assets even under the very worst conditions. And so you have a couple of these things that people clearly value, clearly keep coming back to. There's clearly a lot of demand for. And so you basically look at, hey, what are the top, 50 smart contracts by gas fees paid on these different networks, we should have versions of all those as well. And I think what ends up happening is that um, you like in a perfect world, you would have all brand new ideas, brand new everything. In a realistic world, it's like trying to build a mall, right? And in the mall, you want some staples that people are going to come for, right? And so you want a DEX and you want lending and you want NFTs and you want whatever, right? And then like once you have that outline of like the top things that people want, then you're like, hey, and we have this like really weird, skateboard shop where like if you want to get your kids on the skateboards and here are the really fancy ones, like you know what I mean? And then over time, maybe that skateboard shop becomes really, really large and huge and important, and then you put it everywhere, right? And so that's how I would think about it. Just do what everybody else is doing in the beginning, and then try to like very aggressively look for opportunities. Like, hey, what else can we add that's new and differentiated and different? And I think the last thing that I'll add there is that before, if you look at the playbook of kind of like 2018 to 21, 22, I would say, the first thing you do is you'd go to the Aave and the Uniswap and whatever, and be like, hey, deploy a version over here. And that worked for a while, and people could trust those. But one of the things that happen is that if Uniswap is deployed on a new chain, it's very hard for new DEXs to get spun up and get traction because everybody just goes to Uniswap. And so now, Uniswap, their folks are elsewhere. They probably don't care that much about your chain. It's going to be on the smaller side and just launch, et cetera, et cetera. And so they're not going to be committing their full resources to you guys. And so what happens is that they're not fully committed. Other teams have a really difficult time getting spun up. And so it's actually harder to spin up a homegrown ecosystem because you have these behemoths that have come over and they're just kind of sucking up liquidity and sucking up users while not really investing back into the ecosystem. And so what do you do there? Well, the important thing becomes that, if you know you need a DEX, it's not, hey, let me go get Uniswap to deploy. It's like, maybe that's one option, but in a perfect world, let me try to find a team or grow a team or incubate or whatever it is, or convince a team that's about to launch somewhere else to launch here instead. They're really good. Hey, come do your new product over here. And then what you have is that, if you have like a really, I hate using the mall analogy so extensively, but yeah, if you have this like super luxury mall over here, and you have the same mall over here that has all the same stores, but they're shitty over here, that mall's never going to win, right? And so you need to have unique and differentiated stuff in the smaller mall that draws people in and gets them to come and use this thing, right? In the same way that like, Airdrome or Friendtech did it for Base, right? Or Airdrome is doing it for Base, or like Polymarket is doing it for Polygon, and you have a whole bunch of, or Pumped Out Fund for Solana. You need to have those differentiated stores.
Yeah, I think that's something we contemplate a lot. It's like finding that balance between going after the big blue chip known brands versus trying to home grow our own stuff. And to some extent, as much as we'll just use Uniswap as an example, like Uniswap will never be a Strata product. That's an Ethereum that's born and raised like that is their community. And so even if we brought Uniswap on, it's home to a different ecosystem, even if it's natively deployed on theirs. And I think there's something to be said there. So on this point of like building out this ecosystem, do you have any thoughts on how you can do this in a way without like token incentives? Like you just have to try to build a better user experience and a better brand, or is it a necessity to incentivize these things heavily to compete in this like huge sea of, frankly, mini forks?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, the cop-out answer is that both paths can work. But the realer answer is that, if you look at Base, right? And Base is obviously special. It has Coinbase behind it. Like that's a distribution channel and et cetera, et cetera. And Jesse's amazing. But, there's no token incentives on Base, right? There's no like, huge multi-million-dollar grants being given willy-nilly to, get people to come and do things. People come on their own. And that's where I think that where it's like so incredibly important to be highly intentional with a Bitcoin culture within Strata, within Bitcoin, within, that whole ecosystem, in that there's a lot of people that love Bitcoin. There's a lot of builders on Solana and builders on Ethereum and builders in Bitcoin, builders all over the place that love Bitcoin. And if the value prop to them is like, hey, we're going to create an incredible community here, and we're going to make Bitcoin programmable, and we're going to make Bitcoin extremely useful, and you can only do this here. You can't do this anywhere else because, on Base or on Arbitrum or whatever it is, you could do CBBTC. CBBTC is a wonderful product, but it's not real Bitcoin, right? Here you can do it with real Bitcoin. And so it's a value prop that no one else has and no other ecosystem. And so the question becomes, it's like that value prop is extremely powerful. You're gonna get people, but the question is, how do you make the environment really friendly to them, right? How do you make it so that they want to come build here, they want to come be part of this? And part of that is, being exciting. In the same way that Jesse's constantly, hyping up base and talking about how it's going to change the world and all that. People need to believe that. In the same way that the community is very friendly, whether it's on Arbitrum or on Solana or on Base or any other kind of builder ecosystem, it needs to be friendly here. And you need to have this camaraderie. You need to have this like happiness of we're going to go change the world together, and we're going to get users, and we're going to build things that people want, and we're going to make Bitcoin incredible and make it programmable and like do all the stuff. Like that's how you start drawing people in, and then you kind of like get them to be together, and then the community becomes self-perpetuating over time. But the failure case is that you're like, okay, what we're going to try to do is not carve out this like different version of the Bitcoin culture, right? That is specific to what we're trying to do, but instead like, hey, we're going to take the entire Bitcoin culture and copy paste it over here. And I've seen some teams trying to do that. And then, you get the people that are the gold bugs, and then you get the people that are the maximalists, and you get the people that are super toxic, and you get some amount of builders. But what you find is that, builders don't want to be in the same room as maximalists that are going to be yelling at them and telling them that they're evil people for building stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so, you need to be intentional about curating that, saying the message, getting people on board, and then keeping them here, keeping them building.
Okay, I like it. I think that's that makes a lot of sense to me. So you mentioned base a couple times, so let's like dig in there. In your heart of hearts, like, do you think that anyone can really compete with base? Like, even I look at it, and I look at it with a lot of admiration. Pushing towards like this roll up, and hopefully they get the proving system in, and you actually have this like credibly neutral thing, and you built this like amazing network of developers. Like, do you see anybody kind of competing with what Base is doing, just with the combination of like the capital backing it and the distribution channel? It's kind of a behemoth.
And it's a behemoth, and Jesse and team have done an incredible job. What I'll say is the world is large. The world is insanely large, and if you look at any technology, any religion, any company, any whatever, right? There's never one winner. There's a very small number of kind of like very highly specialized, maybe like you're making something related to nanotechnology. Maybe there's like one winner for one component of one whatever. But overwhelmingly, at the very least, there are multiple winners. And so when I look at Base, Base is doing an incredible job now, but they're not the only winner, right? Arbitrum is doing extremely well. Solana is doing extremely well. If you look at the developer report put out by Electric Capital, there's a number of other ecosystems that are, gaining a lot of developer mindshare. And so when I look at, Bitcoin L2s, just like, can they compete? Like, is it possible to go up against Base? And I think the answer there is, of course it is, right? We're in the very early innings. Like, we're decades out from, what a final state would look like for crypto. And so there's a lot of time. And what, Bitcoin L2s have that nobody else has, that Base doesn't have, is the fact that it's real Bitcoin, right? And that it's making Bitcoin programmable, and nobody else can it's not like you're competing for developers directly with Base every single time, because there's a number of developers, a lot of them out there, that really care about Bitcoin. They want to be building on Bitcoin. And so you have access to not only all the devs that, would potentially build on Base, but you have access to devs that wouldn't build on Base, that want to build on Bitcoin.
So, and is there anything that you haven't mentioned here that like are features that Base is offering that you think have really kind of set it apart? And one example I'll tee up here is something like account abstraction. I feel like they've been on the frontier of that. Like, that is very desirable. That is very cool. Are there other things where you think Base has or is exceeding where other L2s maybe you can't easily just like fork it?
I mean, there's some stuff coming down the pipe.
Share the alpha, leak it.
I would get absolutely crucified immediately. No, what I'll say is that there's a difference between what Base the chain is doing and what product teams at Coinbase are doing, right? And when you think about account abstraction, like, that is not a thing that is unique to Base at all, right? What it is a thing that the Coinbase teams are investing into as a capability for the wallet, as a capability for users, as a capability for paymasters and the developer platform and all that stuff. And so what does that mean tactically? I mean, tactically, it's like, you know, you can have like very close to feature parity with base, but the question becomes, how do you have the great developer experience? How do you have the great tooling and the great kind of like user focus? And that becomes like, that's not a thing that's unique to base, right? Like if you look at, Phantom on Solana, for example, Phantom is an okay wallet, right? Like it's not this extraordinary magical thing. I mean, it's a great wallet, right? Don't get me wrong, but it's not this like unbelievable like new technology, et cetera, done things that nobody has ever thought about, right? But it's just, really listened to users and built a great user experience, and it's super easy to use and intuitive, and people just use it, right? And so when I look at Bitcoin ecosystems, I'm like, hey, are you going to be listening to users? Are there going to be people that really care about what the user journey looks like and are willing to design it in such a way that people do have a wonderful experience, even if it is not, the perfectly kind of, super secure, super ethos aligned version of what a Bitcoiner perfect experience looks like. And like a really great example there is, something like passkeys, right? Like, are you willing to use passkeys when generating, saving your logging into a thing, right? Or are you willing to use a solution like Privy, right? That does some of the management of the keys, but like the user owns it, but then like, the system manages it essentially. Because all these things like make for a great user experience, but they're not the perfect, like I have my own ledger and this ledger has the keys and I've written down the phrase on a piece of paper somewhere. And like, I only connect to it in this way using a separate laptop. And it's just like, you need to think about the users. So that's how I'd put it about it. I don't think it's something that's unique to base, but it is something that every successful ecosystem does.
Yeah. Passkeys are so badass. This idea that you basically have like a hardware wallet, you have a secure enclave like in your phone. You basically carry around the ledger in your pocket and you don't even realize it. And you can get world-class, user experience with like pretty damn high levels of security. That's legit. And I think that is one of those functionalities where like when I talk to some of my maximalist friends, like maybe they poo-poo some of the DeFi stuff, which I think they're incorrect about. But the idea where it's like, you're saying that you don't want to bring like the absolute best UX with like top tier security to Bitcoin and payments. And that's a use case for that. Like the Bitcoin culture isn't really familiar with like account abstraction or like these wallet experiences with passkeys that you can actually build. And in order to do that, like you need to add programmability. So even if you don't want DeFi or EVM or anything like that, like you still need that ability to perform this programmability, this expressivity on top of Bitcoin to get that experience. That single use case alone, I think that I have been able to convince some people like the compelling nature of ZK rollups, because you can't do that on Lightning Network. It doesn't have like the level of programmability to build that experience.
Yeah. And I think once you build that, you can do some really, really nice things. And the way that I put it to people is that, when you send a Bitcoin transaction, how horrible of an experience is it to send a Bitcoin transaction? Like, I'm sorry, it just is, right? First, when I send a Lightning transaction, I'm like, holy shit, awesome, right? Now it's like that jump from sending a Bitcoin transaction to sending a Lightning transaction. To me, it's like the same jump from sending a Lightning transaction to sending transactions that have kind of these smart wallets, these account abstraction features, where so much of the complexity is not only is it fast and cheap and does all the stuff and maybe pays my gas and whatever, but also just like, I don't have to think about the whole journey of what the hell this transaction is actually doing. Like it just does it for me. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful experience. And so that's kind of how I would put it to people. And I think the next step beyond that is not only that, at some point you're able to, and the Ethereum community is moving in this direction. You will no longer have to care which chain you're on. And so whether it's like in the same, security circle, whether you're using intents or resource locks or whatever it is, right? At some point, combine account abstraction with some of this other stuff. Now, all of a sudden, you not only like, it's like another step function improvement above that, where you just come to an application, you don't know where it is, you don't know what token it wants, you just want to go and do the thing or, whatever, and it just does it. And so, these are kind of the step function improvements that you want to do.
So maybe you're referring to like something like a key store here.
Yeah, whether it's, I think key store can be part of it, but key store just like manages your, well, not manages, but it essentially allows you to have kind of similar keys across networks. And I think that's part of the solution, but it actually like doesn't really, it's not mandatory for that to be part of the solution, if that kind of makes sense. Like there's a bunch of other ways of doing that.
Interesting. All right, I feel like you're tiptoeing around maybe some alphas coming out. So hopefully we'll see some cool,
I
amazing
mean, look,
stuff.
yeah, I mean, you can look at something like One Balance, for example, that
Yeah.
we're also investors in.
Yep.
And with them, it's all about resource locks. And it's like once you understand resource locks, you're like, oh my God, this is it. It just solves all the problems, right? It's just awesome.
Yeah, I've heard great things about One Balance. Okay, cool. I think we've covered a bunch here. Do you have any other like spicy hot takes that you want to leave us with, or should we put a pin in it?
Um, I don't know if I have a hot take in particular. I actually was curious to ask you a
Sure.
question,
Yeah.
which is, you guys have been building Alpine for about 2 years now. Is that right?
Yeah, but I mean, I would say like the hard engineering probably only within the past year because that's when like BitVM. Before that, it was like research.
Yeah. So I'm actually very curious about how your kind of like thoughts, perceptions, observations, like what have you noticed about the Bitcoin builder culture, about user behavior, about where the world is going, and how that impacts what you guys are working on.
I think there is a notable shift I mentioned earlier in the Overton window. Um, I posted this in the tweet today that went out with like our announcement. I've kind of been hinting that like I feel like some of the strongest and the best minds in our entire industry are kind of like re-engaging back into Bitcoin. And I think when people see our investor announcement and even more people start talking about it, they'll start to see it's like, whoa, even the kind of like the high priests of Bitcoin development are really getting kind of like ZK pilled and like seeing this future of what rollups and all this stuff can bring. So that is kind of what I'm seeing. And I also did an interview with John Light, who's our technical product manager, and he's I call him the godfather of ZK rollups on Bitcoin. Like he wrote that original seminal piece, and he just said, yeah, like a lot of this stuff is accelerating faster than we could have ever have hoped. This idea that we can actually hack in ZK verification now, it's just ignited this whole new community in Bitcoin. I still think massive amounts of people are sleeping on it, and they kind of are programmed to think that, okay, these people are like probably overhyping like their own bags and saying that you can do all this stuff on Bitcoin, but like we've been there, done that. Like we know that there's some clunkiness to it. And there's like some truth to that BitVM is clunky. But if we can create this kind of ZK verification bridge, even if it's kind of clunky, like that opens up everything else. And I think a lot of people are going to convert back to Bitcoin, and the vibe is shifting for sure. I'm not sure if that answered your question entirely.
Yeah, no, it definitely did. Yeah, I think it's I think frankly a lot of people were probably scarred by the Lightning experience. Um, and I'm a huge fan of Elizabeth Stark and the Lightning network community. I use Lightning. I think it's wonderful. But it was here and ready and programmable for a long time. And I think as people tried using it, and they saw either payments fail or they didn't quite understand what was happening. It just felt like clunky for a long time, and it's really in the last 2 years that I would say that it became like a much more pleasant experience to use. And so I think people come with a healthy dose of skepticism of like, okay, let me see how it actually is before I get excited about it. But I also think that what that means is that it means two things. It means one, teams that take shortcuts have an advantage, right? And that if you can create a great experience by taking a shortcut, that allows you to go to market faster, allows you to have a better experience. And that can be a good thing. It can also be a bad thing, because it could be a bad thing in that you could take a very, very bad shortcut and create actually a system that doesn't work. And it can be done by a team that doesn't have the potential, doesn't have the talent to create a better system out of it. And so they might start getting traction, and it's like, well, they're not going to ever make the best system that they can. And so it's almost like traction in the wrong direction. But one of the other things is it means that people are, they want to try things, and when they see that there's going to be a high quality team that is going to launch something and then improve it over time, and they have that confidence, then it's going to be easier to kind of like test it out, see if it's good, and if it is, start doubling down on it. And so I think that there's an immense amount of capital and talent and users that are primed and ready to really hop on a bandwagon and push forward.
Yeah. You mentioned two things there. I mean, on Lightning, I agree. I mean, I love the Lightning team. I think that they're very strong, ideologically aligned. I think they're building for the right reasons. I think Lightning is a promising tech, but I think they were a little bit of a victim of just misalignment of expectations. Lightning was kind of like hailed as this savior a little bit after the block size wars. And I think people just assumed that it would solve a lot of these issues without actually understanding the tech. And it set Lightning up for, improper expectations in my opinion. So they fell victim a little bit to that. The other thing you kind of mentioned is like, that resonates with me a bit is like, my biggest fear is that if we're right that the ZK rollups like are the future and they're going to hail in this, revolution in Bitcoin, but it just takes too long for us to build. Like maybe it takes us a couple of years to like build it out to something where people actually like it's in a condition where it can compete with, say, like the base experience or something like that. Like, is that going to be too late to where people say, like I'm already just kind of like entrenched in these like custodial systems. Like we're very comfortable with like the ETF. Even though this tech is like legit, maybe it's just like too little too late. And you're not gonna have an answer to that, but that is something that in the back of my head, I'm like, maybe that's fear.
I do have an answer.
Oh, okay.
I do have an answer. If you look at, outside of, let's say, Bitcoin, you look at any other ecosystem that launched, any other blockchain, any other protocol, any other L2, whatever, they all launched in more centralized, more shitty ways. Just straight up, right? And, for a long time, that example was actually Polygon. Like when Polygon launched, Polygon was not doing well at all, right? And the thing and then the plasma on top. And, it took them a while to really find their footing. And then over time started to improve their technology and started to do the ZK stuff and et cetera, et cetera. And, after Polygon, it was Solana, right? When Solana launched, I mean, I known Raj and Toli for a while. Like we were participants in DevNet as part of Bison Trails. And so Solana was falling over all the time, right? When it launched, it was not in a really stable state, right? And it didn't have the tooling and it didn't have the developer experience. It didn't have any of the stuff. And it was pretty shitty, right? But it worked. And so I know over time they started getting users and traction and adoption and so on and so forth. And now it's in a much, much better place. And even if you look at something like Base, like when Base launched, it was like, completely centralized. And then of course, over time it's becoming more and more, scalable and lower transaction fees and also more secure and more decentralized and so on. And so I think that the most important thing is that, if somebody has a mindset of like, hey, it's going to take us like multiple years to like build this thing in a way that, is super good and like matches others and whatever, I think it's the wrong mindset with which to look at it. What the right mindset is we're going to launch a thing that works as soon as humanly possible. It's not going to be the most perfect, most ideal thing in the world, and it's going to take some shortcuts that we're willing to take. We're going to be transparent about what those are and what those risk and trust assumptions are. We're going to talk about what the roadmap looks like in terms of like, hey, what are the next steps that we're going to do in order to get to the ideal state that we're optimizing for and where we're headed and how we're going to get there. And then it's like, hey, you understand what's going on. You understand what we're doing. This thing works now and it's fast and it's cheap and it's a great experience and a bunch of the tooling that works on Ethereum works here and so on and so forth. Come and build. Make Bitcoin programmable. We're gonna change the future. And so I think that like, for folks that are taking like the multiple year mindset, don't launch a shitty thing and just be honest about it and be like, it's not perfect, but it works really well in these ways and it's going to be better over time. Come use it and then go really hard.
Yeah. I think that's good advice and something we try to tell ourselves internally a lot of the time is just push through a product, improve, iterate, the classic kind of, startup advice. With that, I think that we've covered a lot of good content here. Any last words before we kind of wrap up here?
I think that you guys are doing some of the most important work of our lives. And so I hope you're successful, not only from my Bags team, but for Bitcoin. I do, I'm not really worried about the security budget. I'm not really worried about a lot of the other stuff. The thing that makes me worried is that, Bitcoin just becomes more and more centralized over time, just through the nature of, who's holding it and where and how they're using it. And if that's all done through centralized entities, then that's just not a future that I want for Bitcoin. And so I'm extremely thankful and appreciative for you guys. And I hope that you're successful.
Well said. All right. Well, thanks so much, Viktor. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, David. Bye.